Quick tutorial. What we're going to do here is talk about how to extract email addresses from any arbitrary URL using only Google Sheets. And what we want to do, we don't want to manually scrape these, but what we want to do is have a function that will extract email addresses from any URL. Now, there are some ways to do this with some ghetto hacks using the built-in Google Sheets functions, but we don't want to fuck around with that shit. What we're going to do instead is we're going to go to Tools and then Script Editor. And what we've got here is a script editor. So we can add any arbitrary script that we want to a Google Sheets file and run it like any other function. Now, the first thing we need is we need the code to be able to extract an email address from any arbitrary URL or any arbitrary piece of text. Conveniently, this is already written for you in this post that was made previously. It's a phone number and email address extractor. And we can see we have this snippet of code right here. So this is going to work fine for extracting these email addresses. We'll paste this in, and we can leave this as is, but we'll format it to make it a little bit more readable. And so any piece of text we pass into this function is going to return an array or a list of the email addresses found that are matches in that string. So we've got this first part. So we have this first part written. Next, we need to put together a piece of code that's going to allow us to grab the actual text from the web page, and so we can get that HTML that we can then run through this extract email function. So what we can do for this is we can scroll down this page, and I'll link this below as well, and we're going to go ahead and grab the example code, and we're going to write a new function. And we've got a basic piece of code that's going to grab this URL, google.com, and then it's going to return the text of the content, or it's going to log it in a debugger. Now we're going to modify this slightly, so we don't want to use that URL. What we want to use instead is our URL that we pass in here. So it's a variable or a parameter that is named URL. And we don't want to log this in the debugger. What we want to do instead is we want to actually work with this. So we're going to make a new variable called text. And this is going to be this method, we're going to grab the HTML, and then this line here grabs the text out of the HTML so we can parse it. Finally, we're going to make a variable called emails, and this variable is going to be set to the output of this function, extract emails, run on this text. So we're going to pass the text in, so this is the text of the web page. Delete this missing parentheses or this extra parenthesis. And then we're going to extract these emails. Finally, what we want to do is we want to return these email addresses. So we want to pass this back as the result of the function. And finally, we want to make sure that when we return this, we don't want this to be an array, so we don't want it to split into separate cells. So what we're going to need to do is we're going to use this built-in JavaScript function called join. And we're going to take this. So this is an array. And we're going to add the dot to the end, and then join. And by default, unless you specify a different separator, this is going to take an array, and it's going to implode it, essentially. That's the equivalent function in PHP. And it's going to turn this into a comma-separated list of emails. Finally, we're going to return the result. Now, for the sake of example, we're going to start with the Wikipedia page. So we know this is going to include like 700 different email addresses. So we want to make sure that we're actually going to extract everything correctly. So if we go over here, or over here, and we see this function name, so we defined this custom function, and we can call this, or this even directly, if you wanted to call this directly, as a function in Google Sheets. The same as you would any built-in function in Google Sheets. And we actually want to add one more thing in here, so we have a few extra lines added. So if there's an error, we're just going to return this error message. If there's a different error here or a different error here, we'll return some error messages, and this will help you out with debugging. So we go here, press equals, and then type this in, and we're going to pass in the contact page or the URL that we want to run this function on. And this should actually be called something different because we're scraping the email. It should be called like get raw emails or something, but it doesn't matter. So we're going to run this. The amount of time it takes to run can depend on how slow the server is. So if we're trying to get the result from a really shitty site, that could take longer. It has a really large packet size or whatever. So it can take a minute for this to run. And we can see this first one ran correctly. So we went ahead and we got these email addresses from the Wikipedia page. We have a list of email addresses, and if we make this loop around, we can see there's a number of them. And if we drag this, You can see we have this first one run in here, or load in here. A few of these came back with no result found. And we can drag this down again. And for example, if we actually open this, what we'll see is that this is in fact their contact email. This one here seems to have had a stroke, probably because this is a PDF file, so this probably isn't encoded the same way. So that's an edge case. For an HTML file, you will in fact get the correct URLs. Now there is one small bug here. It looks like the regex is having a stroke, and it is including periods at the end of these. If you wanted to parse these off, what you could do is you fix the regex. And we made a small update to this regex here. This will be the one that we paste below this thread. And so now the final character in the regex cannot be a dot or in the email address. So let's go ahead and run this one more time just to verify that we do in fact have the correct code. And we can see we get the same result, but it's not catching these random periods at the end. And we can do one final drag here. And one thing you might note is that if you run this function a ton of times, you will sometimes get an error where it says you can only make so many requests from Google Sheets per minute. If you get that, run it in like halves, and it'll generally work fine. So this looks like it went through fine. This one's, the PDF is still having a stroke, but that's a PDF issue rather than an HTML parsing issue. And what we see here is that we do, in fact, have all of these email addresses that we've gone ahead and extracted. And since this regex, or since we're scraping the entire raw HTML, you can see there is actually another false positive in here. So this, if we go to the page source here, is actually a line from a debugging statement. So this is not an email address, or maybe it is an email address. I don't think that's an email address. Anyway, you might get a few weird things. You could potentially alter this so that you're not scraping this, but you would want to try to get like mail to tags as well. You could also make this more complicated and scrape, like, if people try to conceal the email address with, like, space, bracket, at, close bracket, space, domain.com or something. You could also adjust it, try to match that, or fuck around with the regex to do a little bit more complicated matching. Regardless, this is about 90% correct. We've got the email addresses. We're able to scrape multiple if they apply. And if we had a large list, we would be able to easily scrape through that entire amount to get the contact emails much more quickly than if we were trying to do this all manually. I'll post all this code in the comments and the links to the other resources mentioned in this post